Welcome everyone to our channel for the full story. He said he was on a business trip for 2 weeks, but he was really on a secret getaway with his mistress. The moment he got home, he yelled for his wife to come downstairs. The housekeeper handed him the divorce papers I had signed 15 days earlier. He found the wedding ring and the family heirloom necklace thrown in the trash. When the housekeeper told him one more thing, he collapsed. I sat by the window of my cramped studio apartment, watching the heavy raindrops race down the glass. It had been 15 days since that night, since I'd walked out of that luxurious mansion with my suitcase in hand. Strangely, a profound sense of peace had settled over me. There were no more long nights spent waiting up for my husband, no more the cold scent of cigarettes clinging to his clothes when he came home, and no more seeing the coldness in the eyes of the man I once loved more than life itself. It was only later, through the words of Madison, our devoted housekeeper who had come to see me as her own daughter, that I learned of the scene that unfolded in that house on the day Ethan returned. Madison recounted, "That afternoon the sky was pouring rain, just like today." Ethan walked in, looking tired from what he called a business trip, but was actually a lavish vacation with his lover. The vast mansion was shrouded in darkness and an eerie silence. There were no warm yellow lights, no smell of a home-cooked meal. And, of course, I wasn't there at the door to take his coat, a habit I had kept for the past 7 years. A chill seemed to emanate from every piece of expensive furniture. A thin layer of dust was already settling on the polished ebony coffee table, a surface I had once meticulously wiped down every single day. Ethan frowned in annoyance. He loosened his tie, his voice, sharp and demanding, shattering the quiet of the house. He yelled, "Madison, where are you? Get down here and tell my wife to come down right now." Why is the house so dark and the kitchen cold? Is she throwing another one of her fits? He was convinced I was just being dramatic, sulking over some petty grievance as I had before, and that a few careless words of apology or an expensive gift would smooth everything over after he brought Chloe back into our lives. Madison came up from the kitchen. In her hands was not the usual tray with a glass of orange juice to sober him up, but a plain manila envelope. She looked at Ethan with a mixture of pity and reproach, her voice low, heavy with the disappointment she had suppressed for so long. She said, "Mr. Hayes, have you forgotten, Mrs. Hayes left 2 weeks ago. Wasn't it you who pushed her to this point, who forced her to sign these papers?" Ethan froze, the expensive smartphone in his hand stopping midair. He stared at Madison as if she were speaking a foreign language, his eyes wide with disbelief and confusion. He snatched the envelope from her, pulling out the divorce papers, slightly crumpled at the corner. My signature. The script was neat but firm, placed precisely on the line for the wife. Beside it was the date. Exactly 15 days ago. But that wasn't all. Madison silently placed a black plastic bag on the table, the cheap kind of trash bag you'd find at a discount store, completely out of place amidst the living room's opulence. She continued, "Mrs. Hayes asked me to give this to you. She said, trash belongs in its proper place. She doesn't need you or the things in here anymore. She's returning them all to you." Trembling, Ethan opened the black bag. Inside wasn't filth, but the expensive diamond ring from our 6th wedding anniversary. The stone still sparkled, a cruel irony under the chandelier's light. Lying next to it, even more painfully, was the antique sapphire necklace, the only memento my mother had left me before she died, the one thing I valued more than my own life. Both items lay tangled together in the cold, soulless trash bag. Madison said that in that moment, she saw Ethan stagger and collapse onto the sofa, his face turning a deathly pale. Perhaps it was only then, seeing that precious family heirloom discarded like worthless junk, that he began to dimly realize my departure this time wasn't some childish game or a passive-aggressive tactic. I was truly gone. And I had left everything behind, including the blind love I had wasted on him for all the years of my youth. The memory pulled me back to that fateful afternoon 15 days prior, the day all the endurance within me shattered like a soap bubble. The house still held some warmth then, but the hearts within it had long grown cold. Ethan had brought Chloe home. She walked into our sanctuary with a look of shy innocence, but her eyes glittered with greed as she scanned the luxurious furnishings. Chloe was Ethan's ex-girlfriend, the intense, unfinished first love he had never gotten over, the one he called the one that got away, who had illuminated his broke college years. She had returned, claiming she'd been scammed out of her money and heart overseas and had nowhere to go. And my husband, playing the part of the noble ex-boyfriend, had welcomed her with open arms. Ethan arranged for Chloe to stay in our high-end condo, the Astoria, the very first home we owned, a place filled with memories of our difficult early years building his company from the ground up. When I protested, saying it was our private space, a vault of our shared history, Ethan brushed me off with an irritated look. "Can't you stop being so selfish for once?" he said. "Chloe's in a tough spot. She has mild depression and needs a familiar, quiet space to recover. You're my wife. You should understand and support me. Why do you always have to be so petty?" The word petty left his lips so easily, yet it felt like 1,000 needles piercing my heart. But the peak of his cruelty didn't stop at taking our home. That afternoon, Chloe was preparing for a high society gala. She was hoping to network and find a way back into her singing career. Ethan came home earlier than usual, not to eat the dinner I had cooked, but to make a request so outrageous I couldn't believe my ears. He walked into the bedroom where I was sitting, staring numbly at a pregnancy test, showing 2 distinct pink lines. The joy hadn't even had a chance to bloom before he crushed it. Ethan stood before me, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Emily, let me borrow that sapphire necklace of your mother's for tonight. Chloe is going to a party, and she's wearing a silk gown that needs a statement piece to look elegant. She just got back to the country and hasn't had time to buy anything. You can lend it to her for the evening, and I'll bring it right back." I was speechless. My hand instinctively tightened in my pocket where the pregnancy test was hidden. That necklace was the last thing my mother gave me before she died of a terrible illness. She had told me to keep it as a protective charm, to only pass it down to my own daughter or daughter-in-law. To me, it wasn't just jewelry, it was her spirit, a sacred symbol of a mother's love. Yet my husband, the person who knew its meaning better than anyone, wanted to take it and put it around his ex-lover's neck. I looked up at him, trying to suppress the tremor in my voice. "Ethan, do you hear yourself? That was my mother's, my dead mother. You want me to give a memento of a deceased person to your ex-girlfriend so she can show it off? Do you value her so much that you're willing to trample on your own wife's dignity?" Ethan's brow furrowed, his impatience obvious. He clicked his tongue and waved his hand dismissively as if I were making a big deal out of nothing. "There you go again. She's just borrowing it for one night. It's not going to get damaged, so why are you hoarding it like it's the crown jewels? Chloe is an artist. Her refined aura will bring out the necklace's true value. You, on the other hand, spend all your time in the kitchen. If you wear it, people will just think it's cheap costume jewelry. It's a waste." His words were a stinging slap across my face, painful and humiliating. So, in his eyes, I, the devoted wife who had sacrificed her own singing career to support him for 7 years, was less worthy of my own mother's legacy than some has-been singer who just flew in from abroad. That cruel comparison killed the last shred of hope I had for our marriage. I laughed, a bitter laugh that twisted my insides. The hand in my pocket released the pregnancy test. I realized this child was coming at the wrong time. Or perhaps it had come to help me see the true face of the man I called my husband. I stood up, walked to the safe, and took out the velvet box containing the necklace. But instead of handing it to him, I threw it into the small trash can in the corner of the room. The action made him stare in astonishment, but I met his shock with absolute silence. In that instant, I knew I couldn't stay in that house a second longer. 15 days ago, as the clock hands ticked toward midnight, a sharp pain erupted in my lower abdomen. It came on like a flash flood, sweeping away the last of my feeble strength. I lay curled up on the cold floor, drenched in sweat, my hands clutching my belly where a tiny life was fluttering with weak, desperate pulses. In a state of utter panic, acting on a wife's instinct, I shakily reached for my phone and dialed the number of the man I still called my husband. The phone rang, each long, drawn-out tone a hammer blow against my tightening chest. The first call went unanswered, met only by a callous silence. I didn't give up. forcing myself to endure the pain and call a second time, hoping he was just busy or hadn't heard the ring. This time, someone picked up, but the voice on the other end wasn't filled with concern. It was sharp, annoyed, mixed with the faint, sterile sounds of a hospital. "What is it? Why do you keep calling?" "I'm really busy. If it's not important, don't bother me." I tried to take a deep breath, my voice distorted by pain. "Ethan, my stomach hurts so much. I think I might be miscarrying. Can you come home and take me to the hospital? I'm so scared." I thought that no matter how heartless he had become, hearing that his own flesh and blood was in danger would make him drop everything and rush back. I was wrong. His cruelty far exceeded my imagination. From his end of the line, I could hear Chloe's whimpering, coddled voice. "Honey, my hand hurts. It's bleeding so much. Do you think it will leave a scar?" Instantly, Ethan's tone softened into a soothing coo. "It's okay, sweetheart. The doctor is bandaging it up. It's just a little scratch. It'll be fine." Then, he turned his attention back to me, his voice shifting 180 degrees, becoming cold and filled with disgust. "Did you hear that? Chloe is hurt. She accidentally cut her hand, and it's bleeding. Stop trying to fake being sick to get attention. That trick is getting old. If you're in pain, call a taxi yourself. I don't have time for this." The dial tone buzzed coldly, severing all hope, severing the last fragile thread of our marriage. I would later find out that Chloe's injury was a tiny nick from peeling an apple, a cut that had barely bled before it dried. Yet he, my husband, had been frantic with worry, as if she were on her deathbed. Meanwhile, he dismissed his wife's life and death struggle as a clumsy performance. Back in the present, Ethan stood frozen in the empty living room. The phone in his hand slipped onto the sofa. The memory of that missed call from that night rushed back, strangling him. He remembered how he had turned his phone off right after, to devote his full attention to the scratch on his mistress's hand, leaving me to struggle alone in the dark. Ethan's gaze drifted to the kitchen, where a clay pot sat, long gone cold. He walked over and lifted the lid. Inside was a medicinal chicken soup. It was a dish he had casually mentioned craving a few days ago, complaining of back pain. Even though I was exhausted and my stomach had been aching that day, I had still gone to the market to pick the best chicken. I had simmered it for hours, waiting for him to come home. But he never did. He was busy taking his ex-girlfriend to a party, busy tending to her minuscule wound. The soup had now grown a layer of mold, emitting the sour stench of decay. Just like our rotten marriage, it was beyond saving. Unable to accept that I had left, Ethan bolted from the house like a madman, speeding to the office of my lawyer, Jessica. Jessica was not only representing me in the divorce, but was also an old acquaintance, someone who always maintained a cool, objective demeanor. Ethan believed Jessica knew where I was, and he intended to use money or power to force me to come back and end what he called this childish, drawn-out prank. The law firm was on a high floor of a glass skyscraper, the air thick with the smell of paper and a cold formality. Jessica sat behind a large desk, her eyes fixed on a file. She didn't even bother to look up when Ethan burst in without knocking. Her unnerving calm made his rage feel like punching a pillow. He slammed his hand on the desk, his voice a low growl. "Where are you hiding, Emily? Tell her to come out right now. She can't think she can just run away and solve things. She is my wife. She has to come home." Jessica slowly took off her gold-rimmed glasses, her sharp eyes locking onto Ethan's, her contempt unconcealed. She didn't invite him to sit, nor did she offer him water. She simply opened a drawer, pulled out a thin file, and pushed it across the desk toward him. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "on what grounds are you demanding she return? As the husband who publicly cheated on her, or as an indirect murderer?" Ethan flinched, his face flushing with anger. "What did you say? Who's a murderer? Don't you dare make baseless accusations. I just want to bring my wife home." "She's just being irrationally angry." He remained stubborn, still believing he was blameless, that everything was just a result of a woman's oversensitivity. Jessica gave a faint, cutting smile. "Irrational? You think a woman who endured 7 years of neglect, who sacrificed her career to be your shadow, would suddenly leave over a simple fit of jealousy? Take a look at this." See for yourself what you've done to your wife and child." Ethan's hand trembled as he opened the file. On top was an ultrasound image of a 1-2-week-old fetus, the black and white picture small but clear. Beneath it was an emergency room report with a diagnosis: threatened miscarriage due to psychological trauma and intense physical stress. The admission time matched the night he turned off his phone, the night he was busy tending to the scratch on Chloe's finger. Ethan stammered, his voice trailing off. What is this? Emily was pregnant? Why didn't she tell me? Why would she hide something this important from me?" He stared at the ultrasound, the ground seeming to crumble beneath his feet. The child he had longed for, the child he had blamed me for not being able to conceive, had been there all along. Jessica stood up, walked around the desk, and faced him directly. Her voice was steely. "Tell you? She tried to tell you many times. The day you demanded her mother's necklace for your mistress, she was about to tell you. But did you give her a chance to speak? The night she called you, begging for help, she told you. But you accused her of faking it. You were too busy peeling apples for your lover, too busy pleasing someone else to hear your own wife's cries." Every word from Jessica was like a slap across Ethan's face, leaving him stunned. He staggered back a few steps, his back hitting the cold glass wall. Belated regret began to seep into his very cells, but he still clung to a fragile sliver of hope. He muttered, "No way. She couldn't be so cruel as to take my child away like that." But the only response he received was Jessica's cold stare and the dry click of the file closing, like a final judgment on all his excuses. Leaving the lawyer's office in a daze, Ethan drove home like a man possessed. He ran red lights, swerving through heavy traffic, the blare of horns a distant noise he couldn't register. His mind was consumed by the image of the ultrasound and Jessica's mocking words. He couldn't, or wouldn't, believe he had been so vile as to push his wife and child to the brink. He needed proof. He needed to find something at home to prove Jessica was lying, or at least to soothe the terror rising within him. Back at the house, Ethan charged straight up to the master bedroom. The room still held my faint, familiar scent of jasmine, which I always kept in a vase by the bed. He tore through every drawer and cabinet, flipped over the mattress and pillows, hoping to find a diary or a note I might have left. But everything was empty. I had cleared out my belongings completely, leaving nothing behind that could evoke my existence except a painful, hollow void. In despair, Ethan sank to the floor, his eyes scanning the room aimlessly. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon the small trash can in the corner by the vanity, the one where I usually threw away cotton pads and other small items. He remembered what Madison had said about the trash bag in the living room. A dark premonition urged him forward. The trash can had been emptied, but a single, crumpled ball of paper lay at the bottom. It was probably so small that Madison had missed it. Ethan shakily picked it up. His hands, usually so large and steady, were now clumsy and awkward. He carefully smoothed out the wrinkled paper. It was another ultrasound report, the original copy of the one Jessica had shown him. On the crumpled paper, the ink was smudged in several places, stained as if by fallen teardrops. Ethan touched the faded spots, a damp coldness clinging to his fingertip, like the feel of my tears. He realized I had held this paper, had cried over it, before crumpling it up and throwing it away. How much pain must I have been in to give up on sharing this joy with him? Memories flooded back in a slow, cruel montage. He remembered how, on recent mornings, I would often be sick in the bathroom, my face pale and drawn. At the time, he had just stood outside the door, frowning with irritation, calling in, "What have you been eating to get an upset stomach all the time? Or are you just too lazy to make breakfast and faking morning sickness?" He remembered the times I had craved sour things, secretly buying green mangoes and pickles to eat. When he saw them, he would sneer in disdain. "Eating all that sour junk will ruin your stomach. Don't eat crap and then make me take you to the doctor. I'm too busy for that." All the signs had been right there, in plain sight. But his carelessness and selfishness had blinded him, turning him into a man oblivious to his own wife's pain and joy. Ethan clutched the ultrasound report to his chest and buried his face in my pillow, letting out a raw, agonized scream. The sound echoed in the empty room. But there was no one to answer. Belated remorse now gnawed at his soul, a pain sharper than 1,000 needles. Unable to bear the haunting emptiness of the mansion, Ethan fled, driving to the Astoria, the condo where Chloe was staying. In his twisted subconscious, he still hoped that being with Chloe, the gentle one that got away, would bring him some peace, some comfort, to quiet the storm raging within him. He deceived himself into thinking Chloe was different, that she would understand and be his safe harbor. When Ethan walked in, Chloe was lounging on the sofa, flipping through a fashion magazine. Surrounding her were piles of designer shopping bags she had just purchased using his credit card. Seeing him, she didn't ask if he was tired, nor did she notice his deathly pale complexion. She tossed the magazine aside, her voice a spoiled whine. "You're back? I'm starving. I haven't eaten a thing all afternoon. I'm craving that slow-cooked beef stew. Go make it for me, and make sure it's tender. My teeth hurt, so I can't chew anything tough." Ethan looked at Chloe, and an image of me with the pot of moldy chicken soup flashed in his mind. I had never demanded he cook for me when he came home tired from work. On the contrary, I always had a hot meal ready for him. But now, a mix of guilt and a desire to escape reality made him nod and walk numbly into the kitchen like an automaton. He needed to keep his hands busy, to stop thinking about that crumpled ultrasound. In the small kitchen, Ethan fumbled with the ingredients, his mind a million miles away. As the pot of stew came to a rolling boil, he reached to move it, but his hand slipped. The entire pot of scalding stew tipped over, splashing all over the back of his left hand and arm. "Ah!" Ethan cried out in pain, stumbling back, clutching his burning arm. The pot shattered on the floor, sending stew and meat splattering across the kitchen. Hearing the loud crash, Chloe ran in from the living room. But instead of rushing to check on his injury, her first reaction was a shrill scream. "Oh my God, what did you do? You splashed stew all over my new silk dress, and this wool rug. It's covered in grease. How am I supposed to clean this? Can't you be less clumsy?" She bent down, obsessing over the few drops of liquid on her dress, her face contorted as if it were the world's greatest disaster. She completely ignored Ethan, who was cowering in the corner, sweating from the pain as large blisters began to form on his arm. Ethan stared at the woman before him, the one he had once considered his moonlight, his irreplaceable treasure. In that moment, Chloe's mask of gentle refinement shattered, revealing a chillingly selfish and callous core. He ran cold water over his burn, but the searing pain on his skin was nothing compared to the agony spreading through his heart. He remembered the times he had gotten a small cut while fixing something, or had a fever. I would have been frantic with worry. I would have gently cleaned the wound, bandaged it carefully, and forbidden him from touching water for a week. I would have stayed up all night, placing cool cloths on his forehead. The harsh contrast between his devoted wife and his materialistic mistress was stark and clear, a bucket of ice water thrown in his face, waking him from a long stupor. He had worshipped a false idol, while the real, warm moonlight had been chased away by his own hand. The stinging pain from his burned arm was excruciating, but the coldness emanating from the woman in front of him made him shiver even more. Chloe remained on the sofa, calmly taking a crisp bite of an apple. The crunching sound echoed in the unnervingly silent apartment. She didn't get up to get him an ice pack or a tube of burn cream. Her eyes were glued to her phone, scrolling through new handbag releases, occasionally muttering about the stain on her expensive rug. Ethan trudged into the bathroom and ran the cold tap directly over his red, blistering wound. The sound of the running water pulled his memories back to the old days. The days when he wasn't rich but possessed an invaluable asset. My love and care. He remembered once, clumsily changing a light bulb, he'd cut his hand on a shard of glass. It was a tiny wound, nothing serious. But I had panicked as if the sky were falling. I frantically searched for bandages, disinfecting the cut while gently blowing on it, afraid it would hurt him, my eyes welling up with tears. For the entire following week, I insisted on doing all the chores, from washing dishes to doing laundry, refusing to let him get his hand wet. "Your hands are for making money," I'd said, "and for holding my hand through life. We can't let them get scarred." That meticulous, tender care had once felt smothering to him, something he dismissed as feminine over-anxiousness. But now Standing alone in the cold bathroom, looking at his swollen, ignored arm, he felt the profound loneliness of a man who had thrown away true love. Ethan emerged from the bathroom, his hand wrapped in a makeshift wet towel. Chloe glanced up, not to ask how he was, but to offer a light reprimand. "You need to be more careful next time. For a man, you're so clumsy. Anyway, you should go. I'm tired and want to get some sleep so I look good for my photo shoot tomorrow." She dismissed him like a useless servant, without a hint of affection or concern. He looked at Chloe, the woman for whom he had defied everything, even selling his own integrity, to compensate for their so-called unfinished youth. Now, under the bright lights, the thick layer of makeup on her face couldn't hide the cold, transactional cruelty in her eyes. He realized he had traded a warm, precious gem for a cold, fake stone. A wave of self-loathing rose in his throat, bitter and suffocating. He said nothing, quietly grabbing his coat and walking out the door, leaving behind the moonlight he once worshipped and stepping into the thick, dark night of his belated regret. After that night, Ethan was like a lost soul. He frantically hired private investigators, scouring bus stations and airports for any trace of me, but every lead went cold. My silence was like a death sentence hanging over his head, leaving him unable to eat or sleep. In a desperate search for clues, he was rummaging through old belongings in his home office when his eyes fell on an old laptop covered in dust in the corner of a closet. It was the computer I had used in college. Even after we could afford a new one, I had kept it to store family photos and important data. Ethan opened it. The screen flickered to life. He clicked through folders, hoping to find a diary entry or an address I might have mentioned. But instead of finding my hiding place, he discovered another horrifying truth, one I had quietly compiled and saved before I left. In a folder named Backup, hidden among family photos, was an unfamiliar, password-protected file. But the password was our wedding anniversary, a date he might have forgotten if he hadn't just seen it on the divorce papers. When the file opened, Ethan was confronted with a barrage of screenshots, text messages, emails, and international bank transactions. It was all evidence that Chloe was not the innocent, pitiable victim she pretended to be. Chats with loan sharks overseas appeared, filled with vulgar language and threats of violence if she didn't pay back a gambling debt that ran into the millions of dollars. It turned out Chloe hadn't returned to the States because she missed him or wanted a fresh start. She had run out of options, was being hunted by the mob, and needed a wealthy fool to pay off her debts. Ethan stared in disbelief as he read messages Chloe had sent to a close friend. "That idiot is still obsessed with me. I just have to cry a little, and he believes everything. He sold his company shares for $2 million. I told him it was for a concert tour, but it's really to pay off my debts before they kill me. Once I get him to sign the mansion over to me, I'm out of here. Living with that pretentious old man is boring as hell." Every word was a sharp knife twisting in Ethan's gut, tearing apart the foolish devotion he had cherished for so long. He remembered Chloe's pitiful expression as she spoke of her stifled musical dreams, remembered his own generosity as he sold 20% of his hard-earned company shares to help her. It had all been a perfectly executed act, and he was the most pathetic clown in her show. The money my husband and I had painstakingly built together had become a fool's fund for her gambling and mistakes. Ethan dropped his head onto the keyboard, his hands clutching his hair. A dry, humorless laugh escaped his throat, sounding more like a sob. He had driven away his loyal wife for a professional con artist. He had abandoned his own unborn child for a venomous snake. The naked truth didn't just hurt because he had been betrayed. It horrified him because of his own profound stupidity. But in the midst of his breakdown, a glimmer of hope appeared when the private investigator called. "Hello, is this Mr. Hayes? We've found your wife. She's in a small town up in the mountains." Ethan's luxury car, now caked in mud after a long and treacherous mountain drive, finally pulled up in front of a small bed and breakfast nestled in a misty valley. The air was preternaturally quiet, filled only with the whispering of pine trees and the cheerful chirping of birds, a world away from the noisy, dusty city we once called home. I had chosen this place for its peace, to escape the painful memories, and most importantly, to protect the tiny life growing inside me. I was outside, hanging tiny baby onesies on a clothesline, my hand gently smoothing each wrinkle. My belly was now round and prominent under my loose maternity dress. My face was a little pale, but my eyes had rediscovered a sense of calm. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine cutting off, followed by hurried footsteps, made me turn around. Ethan's familiar figure emerged from the mist. He looked haggard, with an unkempt beard and dark, sunken eyes, a shadow of the dapper CEO he once was. "Emily," he called out my name, his voice cracking with emotion. He rushed forward, intending to pull me into an embrace, as if afraid I would dissolve into the fog. But I stepped back, my gaze as sharp and cold as a razor, stopping him in his tracks. I was no longer the weak, submissive wife of the past. His presence here now only served to disrupt the peaceful life I had fought so hard to build. Ethan froze, his eyes fixed on my pregnant belly. Regret and sorrow flooded his face. He reached out a trembling hand, wanting to touch the child whose existence he had once denied. His voice was choked. Are you okay? Our baby. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I really didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, I wouldn't have." I let out a short, bitter laugh, full of contempt. I brushed his hand away, my voice cutting through the quiet air. "Don't you dare touch me. This baby is mine, and mine alone. It has nothing to do with you. Go home. Go back and take care of your precious mistress. Go peel apples for her. No one here needs your cheap pity." Ethan was stunned. He tried to explain, to tell me he knew Chloe's true colors, that he had sent her away. But his words were like the wind, meaningless and hollow. I looked him straight in the eye, enunciating each word clearly. "Do you think a simple 'I'm sorry' can erase everything? A wound on the skin might heal, but a wound on the heart leaves a scar forever. You killed the husband I loved on the night you turned off your phone. The man standing before me now is just a stranger, nothing more." With that, I turned and went inside, slamming the wooden door shut, completely sealing my world off from his belated apologies. Ethan stood rooted to the spot in the yard, in the biting cold of the mountain air. But that cold was nothing compared to the ice that had formed around the heart of the woman who had once loved him more than life itself. But Ethan didn't give up. The stubbornness of a man accustomed to getting his way led him to rent a cheap room in a motel near my B&B, setting up a permanent watch. Every day, he would loiter around the area where I lived, following me from a distance like a pathetic stalker hoping for a single glance. He saw me take my daily walks, saw me struggle with a basket of groceries, and his heart would twist, but he didn't dare approach for fear of upsetting me and harming the baby. One afternoon, as I was resting on a park bench near a small lake, Ethan gathered his courage. In his hand was a cold can of Coke, beaded with condensation. He remembered back when we were poor college students. Whenever I was sad or tired, all he had to do was buy me one of these, and my face would light up. I considered it the most wonderful and luxurious treat. He thought this small, sweet memory from our past would be the magic key to unlock my heart. He approached me, forcing a smile, and held the can out. "Emily, I saw you walking and thought you might be tired. I got this for you, your favorite. You always used to say this makes life feel brighter." His eyes were filled with hope, waiting for a nod, or at least a softening of my expression. I looked at the can of soda in his hand, then at his face, trying so hard to appear caring. A ridiculous, tragic feeling welled up inside me. This man, who had lived with me for 7 years, knew nothing about the most basic changes in his own wife, or the most elementary knowledge of what an expecting father should know. He was still living in the past, projecting the tastes of a college girl onto the pregnant woman sitting before him. I stood up and took the can from his hand. Ethan's eyes lit up, thinking I had accepted it, but in the next second, I walked directly to the nearby trash can and dropped it in. The metallic clank as it hit the bottom echoed in the quiet park, shattering his fragile hope. I turned back to him, my eyes filled with pity. "Ethan, you're playing the part of a caring husband, but you're a terrible actor. Do you have any idea what pregnant women are supposed to avoid? Soda is full of sugar and chemicals. Do you really think I would drink this and harm my child? You've never actually cared about what I need or want in the present. You're just trying to soothe your own guilty conscience with hollow memories." Ethan stood frozen, his face burning with shame and embarrassment. He stared into the trash can, where the Coke lay among the garbage. He realized his gesture was not only superficial but utterly absurd. The chasm between us wasn't just betrayal, it was a deep, unbridgeable gap in understanding. He had lost me in the smallest of ways, long before the divorce papers were ever signed. I walked away, leaving him standing alone as the evening sky began to darken. A cold wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves at his feet, like a weary sigh for a love that had died from neglect. He understood that the path to redemption wasn't as simple as buying a can of soda or saying a few words of apology. It was far more arduous and uncertain than he had ever imagined. My hard-won peace in the misty mountain town didn't last long. Chloe had sniffed out Ethan's location. She arrived sooner than I expected, bringing with her a furious jealousy and a cloying perfume that poisoned the valley's fresh air. One day, I was reading on the porch while Ethan, as usual, was fussing with the broken wooden fence by the gate, an excuse to see me from afar. Suddenly, a taxi screeched to a halt. Chloe stepped out, her high heels clicking on the gravel. She had dropped the pretense of gentle innocence. Her face was heavily made up, but it couldn't hide her haggardness. Her eyes blazed when she saw Ethan with a hammer in his hand. She stormed toward him, screaming before anyone could speak. "Ethan, so you ran up here to shack up with your ex-wife? You told me you were on a business trip. Turns out you're playing handyman for her." Startled, Ethan dropped the hammer. He quickly stood up and blocked her path, his voice low. "What are you doing here? I told you not to follow me. Go home, don't cause a scene." But Chloe wouldn't listen. She shoved Ethan aside and marched toward me, where I sat calmly, turning the pages of my book. She pointed a finger in my face, her voice a shrill shriek. "And you, Emily," pretending to be some noble victim, running away. "Turns out you're just using that pregnant belly of yours to lure my husband back, aren't you? You're a manipulative bitch." I looked up at Chloe, amused by her audacity. The woman who had destroyed my family was now standing in front of me, playing the victim. I closed my book, my voice even but icy. "Chloe, is there something wrong with your memory? He and I have signed the papers. I'm the one who left, he's the one who followed. If you can't hold on to your man, you should take a look at yourself instead of coming here and barking up the wrong tree." Chloe's face turned purple with rage. She lunged to grab my hair, but Ethan caught her arm. For the first time, I saw Ethan yell at Chloe, his voice echoing across the hillside. "Shut up! Don't you dare touch her. I'm the one who's wrong. You're the one who's wrong. Emily did nothing. Stop acting like a shrew." Chloe stared, stunned, at the man who had once indulged her every whim, now defending his ex-wife in front of her. Her expression shifted from shock to pure hatred. She knew if Ethan went back to me, her gold mine would disappear, and her creditors would not leave her alone. She wrenched her arm free, crocodile tears streaming down her face. "Fine! You yell at me for her. Did you forget everything you promised me? You said you loved me most." I watched the cheap drama unfold, shaking my head in disgust. I went back inside, leaving them to sort out the mess they had created. After the loud argument, Ethan insisted Chloe return to the city, but she feigned a headache, cried, and begged to stay one night in a hotel downtown. Wanting to keep the peace for my sake, Ethan reluctantly agreed. He had no idea it was just a stalling tactic from a venomous snake planning her next strike. The next morning, Ethan drove downtown to buy me fish soup, still believing small acts of kindness could atone for his monumental mistakes. With Ethan gone, Chloe made her way to the B&B. This time, she came on foot, sneaking up like a ghost. I was on the second-floor balcony, watering my petunias, when I saw her at the bottom of the wooden staircase. Gone was yesterday's aggression. Chloe looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. She took a few steps up, her voice sickly sweet. "Emily, can we talk for a minute? About the baby in your belly?" I put the watering can down, looking down at her from a safe distance. "You and I have nothing to talk about. If you're looking for Ethan, wait for him to get back." Chloe smirked and continued her ascent. "Don't be so stubborn. Ethan only feels sorry for you now. Look at yourself. Pregnant and washed up. How can you compete with me? It would be best if you just got rid of it." I'll have Ethan give you a large sum of money, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. A child born without a father will only suffer." Hearing those venomous words, I felt a hot rage surge through me. She didn't just want my husband and my money. Now she wanted to deny my child the right to live. I gripped the railing, my voice sharp. "Get out! Get out of here right now before I call security." Seeing that I wouldn't be moved, Chloe's expression changed. She glanced down the steep wooden stairs, then toward the gate, where Ethan's car was slowly pulling in. A demonic smile spread across her lips. She suddenly reached into her oversized coat, pulled out a small plastic bag filled with a red liquid, and squeezed it hard, letting it burst and soak the front of her white dress. Before I could process what was happening, Chloe threw herself backward, letting out a blood-curdling scream that tore through the quiet morning. "Ah! Emily, don't push me! My baby!" Her body tumbled down the stairs, the dry thud of impact making my heart stop. She lay sprawled at the bottom, clutching her stomach and writhing, the red liquid from her dress pooling on the concrete, creating a horrifying scene. Just then, Ethan walked through the gate, a container of hot soup in his hands. He dropped it, the container bursting open as it hit the ground. He flew to Chloe's side, his face bloodless as he saw the pool of blood spreading beneath her. Chloe grabbed his pant leg, her face a mess of tears and mucus, her voice a weak, broken whisper. "Ethan, our baby." "Emily," she pushed me. "She said I stole her husband, so she killed my baby. It hurts so much. Save our baby." Ethan snapped his head up to look at me, his eyes blazing with red-hot fury and disbelief. He roared, "Emily, why would you do that? She's pregnant. No matter how much you hate me or her, the baby is innocent. How could you be so cruel as to push her down the stairs?" I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the two actors performing their play. I felt no pain, no anger, only a profound contempt rising in my throat. I didn't try to defend myself, didn't cry or beg him to believe me. I simply crossed my arms and looked him straight in the eye, my voice as cold as a winter wind. "Look closely, Ethan. Do you really think I'm stupid enough to attack her in my own home, right where you could catch me? Look up there, at the corner of the roof." Instinctively, Ethan followed my finger. Tucked away in a corner of the eaves, a tiny security camera was blinking with a small red light, silently recording everything. I continued. "Since I moved here, being pregnant and alone, I had cameras installed for safety. I never thought I'd need to use them so soon. She staged the whole thing. She fell on her own. She burst a bag of fake blood. It's all on that memory card." At the word camera, Chloe's moans caught in her throat. Her body went rigid, her eyes darting around in a panic. She never imagined a simple, domestic woman like me would be so prepared. Still, she tried to bluff her way through, wailing even louder. "Don't believe her! She's lying! It hurts so much, honey. Take me to the hospital. My baby's dying." Ethan looked from Chloe's panicked face to my unnerving calm. Doubt began to creep in, but the pool of blood on the ground looked too real. He couldn't risk it. He gritted his teeth and scooped Chloe up in his arms. "All right, we'll sort out who's right and wrong later. We have to get to the hospital now." His car sped away, leaving me alone in the sunlit yard. I didn't chase after them. I calmly went inside, downloaded the video footage to my phone, and called Jessica, my sharp-witted lawyer, who happened to be on a business trip nearby. I knew this drama needed a spectacular finale, witnessed by the proper authorities. When Jessica and I arrived at the hospital, Chloe was in an emergency room bed, still groaning and clutching her stomach. Ethan stood beside her, anxiously holding her hand, his white shirt stained with red blotches. The doctor on duty, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, came out looking annoyed and confused. He glanced from Ethan to Chloe and shook his head. Ethan rushed forward. "Doctor, how is my wife? Can you save the baby? She lost so much blood." The doctor pushed Ethan's hand away, adjusting his glasses, his voice booming with irritation. "This woman isn't pregnant, so there's nothing to save. Her uterus is completely normal, no signs of pregnancy whatsoever." Ethan was stunned. "No, that can't be. She said she was 3 months along. Then, what was all that blood? The doctor tossed a small, squashed plastic bag onto the counter. Blood? You should ask her where she bought the pig's blood or what food coloring she used to make it look so real. I've been a doctor for decades, and this is the first time I've seen someone bring a bag of fake blood into the ER. She has some minor bruises from the fall, but there was no miscarriage. The emergency room fell silent. All eyes turned to Chloe. She shrank back on the bed, her face now truly as white as a sheet from fear. Ethan turned to her, his expression shifting from worry to disbelief, and finally, to utter revulsion. He stammered, "Chloe, you lied to me? You were never pregnant? All this time, it was all a lie?" Chloe tried to deny it. "No, I really was pregnant. The doctor must be mistaken. Honey, believe me." Just then, I walked into the room, holding my phone up high. On the screen, the clear video played, showing Chloe on the stairs, pulling the bag of fake blood from her coat, bursting it, and then throwing herself down. My voice was calm but firm. "The doctor isn't mistaken. Here's the proof of her little performance. Chloe, your acting was very convincing, but unfortunately, the audience has seen through it. Using fake blood to frame me for murder? That's a serious crime." Jessica, standing beside me, delivered the final blow. "With this evidence of slander and staging a crime scene with intent to defraud, we can press charges immediately." Hearing this, Chloe went limp, collapsing onto the bed in despair. Ethan stood as if struck by lightning, the world spinning around him, the pain of betrayal so intense he could barely breathe. Chloe cowered on the hospital bed, her face a bloodless mask of terror. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but she was surrounded by looks of contempt. Ethan stood there, shoulders slumped, his hand still stained with the red liquid from the bag Chloe had burst. He looked pathetic, like a lost child caught in a web of lies. Just as Chloe was stammering about how she did it all because she loved him so much, the sound of determined heels clicked on the tile floor. A well-dressed, middle-aged woman in a stylish coat and carrying a designer handbag swept into the room. She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp, perfectly made-up eyes that scanned Chloe as if she were a piece of trash. She strode up to Chloe, her voice dripping with scorn. "Well, it's a small world. I never thought I'd see you here, looking so pathetic. Trying to scam another rich man with your tired old tricks? You've been using the same routine for 8 years. Don't you ever get bored?" The moment Chloe saw the woman, the color drained completely from her face. She trembled and tried to pull the blanket over her head, but the woman ripped it away. Ethan looked from the stranger to the quivering Chloe. "Who are you? How do you know her?" he asked, frowning. The woman scoffed, looking Ethan up and down. "So you're the latest victim? You look sharp, like a successful businessman. No wonder this little fox latched onto you. I'm the wife of the old man she was shacked up with in Europe for 3 years. The one she scammed out of $1 million before she fled back here." Ethan was speechless. He stammered, "What are you talking about?" She said she was the one who was scammed, that she was heartbroken. The woman let out a loud, chilling laugh that echoed through the room. "Heartbroken? She's the master of heartbreak. Let me guess, she told you she was pregnant, right? Wake up. 8 years ago, to maintain her figure and make it easier to cheat on my husband without complications, she secretly had a tubal ligation. A woman who's had her tubes tied can't get pregnant, let alone have a miscarriage." Her words were like a lightning bolt, tearing through the dark clouds in Ethan's mind. He staggered back, his back hitting the cold wall. He stared at Chloe as if she were a monster. Every belief, every ounce of pity, every excuse he had used to justify his betrayal vanished into thin air. The child he had been doting on was a ghost that never existed. He had thrown away his own flesh and blood, growing in my womb, for an empty uterus and a black heart. Chloe knew it was over. She scrambled off the bed and fell to her knees at Ethan's feet, her face a mess of tears and snot. "Ethan, don't believe her. She's slandering me. I really love you. I only did it because I wanted to keep you. I was scared of losing you." But this time, the tears had no effect. The cruel, naked truth had been exposed, turning the love he had worshipped into the world's cheapest joke. Ethan stood frozen, looking down at the woman clinging to his legs like a leech. A wave of nausea churned in his stomach. He remembered how he had treated her like a queen, how he had been cold to his wife for her, how he had sold his life's work for her. 20% of his company, $2 million, all of it had been thrown away on her lavish lifestyle and paying off mob debts, while his own wife had pinched every penny, wearing the same old clothes for years. With all his strength, Ethan kicked out, sending Chloe sprawling onto the cold floor. He roared, his voice hoarse with pain and rage. "Get out! Get away from me, you venomous snake! You lied to me! You ruined my family! Give me back my wife and child! Give me everything back!" He lunged for her, but his hands were shaking too violently. He had no strength left. Thrown to the ground, Chloe's act finally dropped. Her hair was a mess, her makeup streaked grotesquely across her face. Seeing that Ethan was done with her, she stopped playing the victim. She scrambled up, wiped the fake blood from her lips, her eyes blazing with hatred. She hissed, "You're kicking me out? Who do you think you are? You think I need your pathetic love? If it weren't for your money, I wouldn't have given a weak, spineless man who abandons his wife and child a second glance." Ethan stared, shocked at how quickly she could change. Chloe smirked, her tone shifting to blatant blackmail. "Listen carefully. The $2 million you gave me? It's all gone. Don't even think about getting a penny back. And don't think you're off the hook. I have all the evidence of your tax evasion, proof that you conspired with partners to inflate material costs. If you dare abandon me now, I will leak everything to the press and the IRS. Let's see if you can hold on to your CEO title then, or if you'll be doing your accounting from a prison cell." I stood in the doorway, watching the vicious scene unfold, my heart cold as ice. One was greedy and cruel, the other foolish and unfaithful. They deserved each other. But hearing Chloe's threats, I shuddered at her cunning. She had planned every move, having him in her grip from the very beginning. Ethan had never been her lover. He was just prey to be devoured. Hearing her threats, Ethan's face went from red to ghostly white. He never imagined he'd been nursing a viper. The career he had built, the reputation he had guarded, was now in the hands of a desperate madwoman. He completely broke down. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, clutching his head and sobbing like an abandoned child. His cries were desperate and tragic, but no one felt pity. It was the price he had to pay for his own betrayal. I looked at Ethan, then at Chloe standing there with a triumphant sneer, and felt an overwhelming exhaustion. I wanted to leave, to escape the toxic air, but just as I turned to go, a sudden, sharp pain shot through my lower abdomen, more intense than anything before. The world tilted, and I collapsed. "Emily, what's wrong?" Jessica's frantic scream sounded both near and far. I felt her arms supporting me, her voice trembling. I wanted to answer, to say I was in agony, to save my baby, but my throat was tight. A warm liquid began to flow from between my legs, soaking my dress. This time, it wasn't a bag of fake blood. It was real. Hearing the commotion, Ethan looked up from the floor. When he saw me lying there, my face pale, real blood starting to pool on the ground, he snapped out of his stupor. He scrambled to his feet and lunged toward me like a wounded animal, shoving Chloe aside. He screamed, "Doctor! Doctor! Where are you? Save my wife! Save my child!" He tried to lift me, but Jessica was faster. The slender lawyer stood in front of him, her eyes blazing with fury, and shoved him hard in the chest. "Get away from her!" she yelled. "Don't you touch her with your filthy hands. Haven't you hurt her enough? If anything happens to her or this baby, I swear I will make your life a living hell. I will sue you into oblivion." Ethan froze, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. He stared at the fresh blood, his heart constricting with a pain and fear so immense it choked him. He wanted to touch me, to apologize, but he knew he had lost that right. He could only watch as doctors and nurses rushed in with a gurney, lifted me onto it, and hurried me toward the operating room. In the corner, Chloe watched the chaos, her face filled with terror. She never thought things would go this far. She tried to slip away, but 2 hospital security guards, summoned by Jessica, detained her. Jessica pointed at her, her voice like ice. "Don't even think about running. The police are on their way. Get ready to go to jail for slander and assault." Lying on the gurney, the ceiling lights blurred above me. The physical pain was tearing me apart, but I clung to consciousness. I placed a hand on my belly and prayed, "Hang on, little one. Don't leave me. We've come this far. We can't fall now." The doors to the operating room swung open, swallowing me into a cold, white light, leaving behind the desperate, broken sobs of the man who was once my entire world. Time in the waiting room crawled by. Ethan sat on the cold floor outside the operating room, his head buried in his knees. He had never been so terrified. The fear of permanent loss, of death, and of his own conscience was suffocating. Every time the door creaked open, his heart leaped with a desperate hope for good news and a paralyzing fear of the worst. Jessica sat opposite him, her face a stony mask, but her tightly clasped hands betrayed her anxiety. Madison had also rushed to the hospital. She sat beside Jessica, her eyes red, murmuring prayers under her breath. No one spoke to Ethan. Their silence was an invisible wall, isolating him in a pit of guilt and loneliness. After more than 2 agonizing hours, the light above the door finally went out. A doctor emerged, pulling down a blood-splattered mask, his forehead glistening with sweat. Ethan shot up and grabbed the doctor's arm, his voice cracking. "Doctor, my wife, my child, how are they?" The doctor looked at Ethan's disheveled state, sighed, and said, "The mother suffered a placental abruption and lost a lot of blood. You got her here just in time. We performed an emergency C-section. It's a baby girl, 4 pounds, 10 ounces. She's premature, but she has a strong cry and good reflexes. We've moved her to an incubator for observation. The mother is weak and needs rest and a blood transfusion, but for now, she's out of danger." Hearing the words "out of danger," Ethan's legs gave out. He sobbed uncontrollably, tears of relief and remorse streaming down his gaunt face. He tried to rush in to see us, but Madison and Jessica blocked his path. Madison stood with her arms outstretched, her eyes firm. "Mr. Hayes, you need to go home. Mrs. Hayes just survived a near-death experience. Don't go in there and upset her more. If you have any conscience left, please, just let her be." Ethan stopped. Peeking through the small window in the door, he saw me lying unconscious on the bed, hooked up to a web of IV tubes. The weight of his guilt crushed him. He knew he had no right to enter that room, no right to touch his wife or his daughter. A few hours later, I woke up in the recovery room. The first things I felt were a dull ache across my lower abdomen and a profound emptiness. A nurse brought a tiny swaddled bundle to my side. "You're awake," she said softly. "Here's your baby. Your daughter is a little fighter. She's breathing all on her own. She just needs a few days in the incubator to get stronger." I looked at the tiny, reddish life sleeping peacefully, her little lips moving slightly. Tears of pure happiness streamed down my face. This was my flesh and blood, the one reason I had to keep going. When the nurse asked if my family was here to visit, I glanced toward the door and saw Ethan's silhouette hovering outside. I turned away, fighting through the pain, and told the nurse in a weak but steady voice, "Please, don't let that man in here. I don't want to see him. My husband. He died the night he turned off his phone and left me in agony. The man out there is just a stranger I used to know." After being discharged, I didn't return to the mountain town. I rented a small apartment tucked away in a quiet city neighborhood. The room was cramped, the walls yellowed with age, but it had a sunny window where I placed a small bassinet for my daughter, Daisy. I named her Daisy, hoping her life would be as simple and resilient as a wildflower, able to bloom no matter the storm. Life as a single mother was a daily struggle. My meager savings dwindled with every can of formula and pack of diapers. At night, when the city outside grew quiet, I would hold Daisy, looking at her sleeping face, and tears would fall. The C-section scar still ached, but it was nothing compared to the scars on my heart. I told myself I couldn't fall apart. I was her whole world now. To make ends meet, I asked Madison, who had quit her job with Ethan to help me, to watch Daisy in the evenings. I started looking for a way back to my passion for singing, buried for 7 long years. I got a gig at a small, smoky jazz club, a place where the dim lights cast long shadows on an old stage. The first night I held a microphone again. My hands trembled. It felt both familiar and foreign, like meeting an old friend after a lifetime apart. I didn't sing upbeat pop songs. I sang soulful, melancholic ballads about heartbreak and broken dreams. My voice, born from a place of deep pain, blended with the simple piano melody, creating a raw, emotional connection that silenced the room. I sang my heart out for the wasted years of my youth, for the child who would grow up without a father. When the last note faded, my eyes were burning. In the dim light, I saw tears rolling down the cheeks of a few strangers in the audience. The owner of the club, a kind-faced, middle-aged man with graying hair, applauded slowly and came over. "Your voice doesn't have the technical polish of a trained singer," he said, "but it has soul. It has the truth of a woman who has known pain. Keep singing like that, and you'll make a living." His encouragement was a small flame that warmed my frozen heart, igniting a belief that even when cornered, you can find a way out if you stand on your own 2 feet. Life went on. A quiet rhythm of caring for Daisy and earning just enough from my singing gigs to get by. I thought I would remain an anonymous singer in that little club forever, until one fateful night changed everything. It was raining heavily, and the club was nearly empty. I chose to sing a particularly heartbreaking song, my emotions raw and exposed. I sang as if I were pulling the words from my very soul. I had no idea that in a dark corner, a young man was recording my performance on his phone. The next morning, as I was changing Daisy's diaper, Madison rushed in, holding her old phone, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Emily, look at this. I think you're famous. This video of you singing last night is going viral." I took the phone, unable to believe my eyes. The grainy video had millions of views overnight. Thousands of comments flooded the page, some praising my haunting voice, others curious about the mysterious singer with the sad eyes. In the noisy world of social media, my simple, honest voice had become a strange phenomenon, touching the lonely corners of countless hearts. A few days later, a sophisticated man in a tailored gray suit found his way to my tiny apartment. He was Mark Bishop, a well-known music producer famous for discovering hidden talent. He didn't act superior. He sat down on a worn plastic chair, glanced around the humble room, and then looked at me with respect. "Emily," he said, his voice warm and persuasive, "I've heard you sing, and I see the story in your eyes. I can't promise to make you a superstar, but I can promise to give you a stage worthy of your voice. You won't have to sing for milk money anymore. You'll sing to reclaim your own worth." His offer was a lifeline. I looked at Daisy sleeping in her bassinet, then at my own calloused hands. This was my one chance to change our lives, to give my daughter a better future. I took a deep breath, looked Mark straight in the eye, and nodded. The moment I signed the contract, I knew I was stepping into a new, fiercer battle, but one that promised a glorious victory. Fame came swiftly, and with it, trouble I never anticipated. Ethan, the ex-husband I had tried so hard to forget, found me. He showed up at my door one evening as I was getting ready for a performance. He looked more put together than he had at the hospital, but he still carried that same arrogant, possessive air. He glanced at me in my elegant stage dress, a flicker of unreasonable jealousy in his eyes. He didn't ask about his daughter. Instead, he pulled a thick envelope from his coat and tossed it on the table. "Here's $10,000, he said, his tone condescending. "Take it for you and the baby. But on one condition, you quit singing, immediately. You are the ex-wife of a businessman. Singing in those seedy clubs is an embarrassment to me. People will think I can't provide for my own family." I looked at the envelope, then at his smug face, and felt sick. He still thought money could solve everything, that it could buy dignity and silence criticism. He was afraid of my success not because he cared about me, but because he was afraid it would tarnish his fragile ego. I picked up the envelope and stuffed it back into his pocket, my actions sharp and decisive. I gave a cold smile. "Ethan, take your money and your fragile honor and go. I earn a living through honest work. I don't steal or lie." How is that an embarrassment? What's truly shameful is a man who cheats on his wife, abandons his child, and then tries to use money to lecture others. Ethan's face flushed with anger. "Don't be so stubborn. You think the entertainment industry is so clean? You're following that producer around. Who knows if your relationship is strictly professional? Get out," I yelled, cutting off his filthy train of thought. I pointed to the door, my voice like steel. "Get out of my house before I have the neighbors drag you out. How I live my life is none of your business. From now on, don't you ever show your face here again." Ethan gritted his teeth, glared at me for a moment, then stormed off. The car door slammed with a violent bang. I leaned against my door, exhaling slowly, my heart heavy. I knew his appearance was a sign of more storms to come. Just as I feared, a few days later, a media firestorm erupted. Chloe, despite being out on bail awaiting trial, was not going down without a fight. Like a cornered animal, she was determined to take one last bite. Using her remaining money and shady industry contacts, she leaked a series of vicious, false rumors to destroy my budding career. One morning, I woke up to find my face plastered across tabloid websites and forums. The headlines were sensational and defamatory. The truth about viral sensation: Emily Hayes ditched her struggling husband for a music mogul, the phony singer's secret party girl past exposed. They were accompanied by cleverly edited photos of Mark and me at a business dinner, made to look like a secret romantic date. The public, like a pack of hungry wolves, devoured it. The same people who had called me a muse yesterday were now cursing me as a heartless gold digger. They didn't care about the truth. They reveled in tearing down a woman they had never met. My phone rang incessantly with hateful messages and threats. I was terrified. Ethan sat in his office, watching the news unfold. He knew it was Chloe's dirty work. But instead of defending me, he remained silent. In his twisted mind, he hoped that if I were abandoned by the world, I would have nowhere else to go and would be forced to come crawling back to him for protection. He wanted to be the hero, to satisfy his selfish ego. I sat in my apartment, holding Daisy, tears falling onto her innocent face. Why was life so unfair? I just wanted to live honestly and raise my child. At my lowest point, just as I was about to call Mark and quit, the doorbell rang. It was Mark and Jessica. Jessica put a firm hand on my shoulder. "Emily, don't be afraid. The truth will prevail. Chloe wants to play dirty? We'll fight back with facts. I have all the legal paperwork ready. This time, it's not just slander, it's a criminal offense. Are you ready to fight for yourself and for your daughter?" Looking at them, I felt a surge of strength. I had done nothing wrong. Why should I run? I wiped my tears and clenched my fists. "I'm ready," I said. "I won't let them trample on us anymore." The small room was transformed into a makeshift studio. I sat in front of the camera, my hands clasped together to stop them from shaking. I knew that silence now would be an admission of guilt. I took a deep breath as the live stream began, thousands of people waiting to judge me. I didn't cry or plead. I presented facts. My voice was quiet but steady. "Hello, everyone. I am Emily. For the past few days, you've heard many stories about me. Today, I'd like to tell you my own." One by one, I held up the evidence. Bank statements showing million-dollar wire transfers to Chloe's overseas accounts to pay off her gambling debts. I held up the contract showing Ethan had sold 20% of his company's shares to pay those debts under the guise of funding her comeback tour. The online comments shifted from condemnation to confusion, but the final blow was the audio recording of that fateful phone call. My phone had automatically recorded it. Ethan's cold voice filled the air. "Did you hear that? Chloe is hurt. Stop trying to fake being sick. Call a taxi yourself. I don't have time for this." It was followed by Chloe's fake whimpering. I stopped the recording, tears I could no longer hold back streaming down my face. My voice choked with real pain. The night he was busy tending to a scratch on his mistress's hand, I was alone, going into premature labor. I almost lost my life. And my babies. I didn't leave because of money. I left because I had to survive. For my daughter. The raw, undeniable truth hit the public like a tidal wave, washing away all the lies. The online mob turned their fury on Ethan and Chloe. The media storm Chloe had created had turned back on them, becoming a hurricane that would sweep away everything Ethan had left. At his company's headquarters, the atmosphere was toxic. The phones rang off the hook. Furious shareholders stormed the boardroom, demanding an explanation for the secret sale of company shares and the catastrophic damage to the company's reputation. Ethan sat at the head of the table, the CEO chair now feeling like a bed of nails. "We invested in you, not so you could throw our money away on a con artist," one of his oldest partners yelled. The company's stock plummeted. Contracts were canceled. The bank called in its loans. Ethan stared at the sea of red on his computer screen, feeling like he was watching himself bleed out. He had lost everything. His reputation, his career, the trust of his peers, and most importantly, the family he had personally destroyed. That afternoon, he walked out of the office building for the last time, met not with looks of admiration, but with pity and contempt. He got in his car with nowhere to go. The mansion was being seized by the bank. He drove aimlessly, remembering the life he once had, the warm meals, the clean, pressed shirts. The regret was a physical entity, gnawing away at his soul, leaving behind an empty, broken shell. He finally understood the price of betrayal wasn't just money. It was a soul-crushing loneliness. Chloe knew she was finished. When the news of the lawsuit and the irrefutable evidence went public, she knew the law was closing in. Panicked, she grabbed the last of her expensive jewelry, stuffed it into a bag, and headed to the airport with a fake passport. But just as she handed the passport to the customs agent, 2 plainclothes police officers stepped up behind her. She screamed and fought, but the cold metal of handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. As she was led away, she looked back desperately, but there was no one there to save her. To pay back the company and avoid prison, Ethan was forced to liquidate all his personal assets. The luxury car, the expensive watches, the high-end condo, all gone. He became completely bankrupt. He moved his few remaining belongings into a damp, squalid room in a poor part of the city. That night, he ate a cheap instant noodle cup under a single, dim bulb. The steam blurred his glasses, or perhaps it was his tears. He had once stood at the pinnacle of success. Now, his own greed and blindness had pushed him into the abyss. He had nothing left but an empty future. After the storm passed and my name was cleared, I poured all my energy into the biggest music competition of the year. It wasn't just about talent. It was a declaration that the weak, submissive Emily was gone, replaced by a phoenix risen from the ashes. The training was grueling, but every time I saw Daisy smile or Mark's encouraging gaze, I found the strength to go on. The night of the finale, I stood on the dazzling stage in a magnificent red gown, feeling proud and powerful. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and as the first notes of the piano began, I started to sing a song I had written myself, called Rebirth. The lyrics told the story of a woman's journey through pain to find the light. I didn't sing with perfect technique. I sang with a broken and mended heart. My voice soared, breaking free of all constraints, touching the souls of the thousands in the audience and the millions watching at home. When the last note faded, the entire auditorium was silent for a beat before erupting in thunderous applause. I opened my eyes and saw tears on the judges' faces, saw the pride in Jessica's and Mark's eyes, and I knew I had won. It wasn't just about the trophy. It was a victory for my own resilience and self-worth. Standing there, bathed in the spotlight, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past no longer held any power over me. It had forged the woman I was today. On the day of the divorce finalization, a light rain was falling. I walked into the courtroom in a chic white pantsuit, calm and ready to close this painful chapter. In stark contrast, Ethan looked haggard and defeated. His shirt was wrinkled and faded, his eyes sunken. The proceedings were quick. When the judge addressed the division of assets, Jessica stood and presented the evidence that Ethan had squandered our shared assets to pay Chloe's debts. He was held solely responsible for that loss. Ethan sat silently, his head bowed. He had no lawyer. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he just shook his head weakly. "I have no objections. I agree to all of her terms." In the end, because Ethan was bankrupt and saddled with enormous debt, I didn't ask for any further assets. I only asked for full custody of Daisy and the legally mandated child support, though I knew it was unlikely I would ever see much of it. The judge's gavel fell with a sharp crack, officially ending our 7-year marriage. Leaving the courthouse, I took a deep, clean breath of the damp, free air. As I waited for Jessica, a hurried footstep came up behind me. A rough, trembling hand grasped my elbow. It was Ethan. "Emily," he pleaded, his eyes filled with a pathetic desperation. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but please, give me one more chance. I want to start over. I want to see my daughter." I looked at the man who was once my world, now a pitiful stranger. I felt nothing, not even anger. I gently removed his hand from my arm, creating a clear boundary between us. "Ethan," I said, my voice serene, "chances aren't something you can just ask for, especially after you threw yours in the trash along with our wedding rings. Think about Daisy. A child needs a father." "I know I was wrong," he sobbed, about to drop to his knees. "My daughter needs a decent father to look up to," I interrupted, a faint smile on my lips. "Not a man who betrays his family. You have the right to visit her, as the law allows. But don't ever dream of coming back to me." The husband I loved died the night he turned off his phone to peel an apple for another woman. The person standing in front of me now is just a stranger, and the debts between us have been settled. I turned and walked away without a backward glance. As I got into Jessica's car, I saw Ethan's small, lonely figure shrinking in the rearview mirror, lost in the rain. In the years that followed, I heard snippets about Ethan's life. He worked manual labor, jobs a mover, a delivery driver to survive and pay off his debts. Someone saw him once, eating a cheap lunch on the sidewalk, covered in sweat and grime, a world away from the polished CEO he had been. They said whenever he passed a store with a TV playing one of my performances, he would stop and stare for a long time, looking from my radiant image on the screen down to his own calloused hands. In those moments, I imagined the regret was a sharper punishment than any court could deliver. He had a home, a loving wife, a bright future, and he had thrown it all away for a phantom. Now the phantom was gone, and he was left with nothing. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no pity. It was simply cause and effect. 3 years later, I sat in a sun-drenched cafe garden, sipping chamomile tea. Daisy, now a bubbly 3-year-old in a floral dress, chased butterflies, her laughter echoing like music. Sitting with me was Michael, a quiet, kind musician who had been arranging my songs for the past 2 years. He wasn't a tycoon or a celebrity, just a good man with warm, sincere eyes. He didn't make grand promises. He showed his love in small, everyday ways, patiently playing with Daisy, carefully deboning her fish, being a steady shoulder for me to lean on after the curtains fell. With him, I found the gentle, enduring peace I had longed for. My phone buzzed. It was a bank notification, a child support payment of $500 from Ethan. The transfer memo simply read, "For my daughter, Daisy." He sent it every month without fail. I smiled softly and put the phone away. The payment no longer stirred any emotion in me. I had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for my own. I looked out and saw Michael lifting Daisy high into the air, both of them laughing in the morning sun. After all the storms, I finally understood that happiness isn't a destination, it's the journey. I had been broken, but now I was whole again, stronger and more vibrant than ever. The sky after a storm is always the brightest, and my life at last was clear, peaceful, and full of hope.